Hello friends, Nathan here, and this is the second video in my three-part series, Ear Training 101, where I'm giving you strategies to help you create your own classical or fingerstyle guitar arrangements by ear, or just to be able to learn songs by ear in general. Now in part one, I gave you the method that I use to identify chords by ear using only the bass note. And in today's video, we're gonna be building on some of those concepts. So if you haven't watched part one, pause this video, go watch that right now so you're not lost, and then come right back. I've linked that video down below. As a refresher for those of you who've already seen it, we talked about how you can use just a little music theory and trial and error to identify an entire chord from the bass note alone. Now the reason this method is so game-changing is because it's a lot easier for our ears to pick out just the bass note of a chord than it is to pick out each individual note of the chord one by one to try to identify the chord itself. Now where this method falls short, where we left it in part one, is that it ran under the assumption that the bass note of the chord is the root of the chord, which isn't always the case. So I left you with the assumption that if your bass note was an A, then it must either be an A major or an A minor chord. Now more often than not, that will be true, but that doesn't take into account chord inversions where the bass note of the chord is not the root. So that's where we're gonna be picking things up today. I'm gonna show you how to identify every major or minor chord that shares the same bass note. That way, once you figure out the bass note of the chord you're trying to identify by ear, you know all your possible chord options that it could be without having to assume that that bass note is the root note, so that you can then test each of those options to figure out which one matches the chord you're listening to. To do this, we need to back up and make sure we understand the basics of chord building. Now, I always talk about how you don't need to know a ton of music theory to make guitar arrangements. I personally have no love for music theory beyond the stuff that I know is gonna help me practically on a regular basis. I've never been one to geek out on music theory, so I learn the stuff that I need to know that's gonna help me and that I'm gonna use, and I ignore the rest. So you can trust that the music theory that I teach you is super practical and frankly, not that complex. So hang in there. We're gonna dive in a little bit here, but you're gonna see how beneficial chord building knowledge is, not only for our purposes here with identifying chords by ear, but for arranging in general. In fact, this leads directly into the free training that I'm offering, Fretboard Freedom, where I teach you how to find and play chords anywhere on the fretboard. That is so crucial for making your own guitar arrangements. So after this video, make sure you check that out. You can sign up for free at beyondtheguitar.com or follow the link down below. But let's get back to it. A chord is built off of only three notes: the root, the third, and the fifth. A good way to visualize this is with our hand here. The root is my thumb, the third is my middle finger, and the fifth is my pinky. Now the root note is the note that the chord is named after. So if we take an A chord, the root note is an A. Now I'm gonna count up the scale here. A as my root, B, C here at my middle finger is my third, D, E at my pinky is my fifth. So an A chord consists of the notes A, C, and E. Now the differentiating factor between a major and minor chord is that third. So both chords, A major and A minor, have a C as its third, but what kind of C? A major chord has what we call a major third, which is 4 half steps up from the root, and a minor chord has a minor third, which is only 3 half steps up. So we need to count up from the root to the third by half step to determine how we need to alter that third based on whether we're trying to play a major or minor chord. The easiest way to do this is to picture a piano keyboard. Each key on the piano represents a half step, so you can see that most notes are 2 half steps apart because they have an additional black key in between them. But some notes, E to F and B to C specifically, are only 1 half step apart because they don't have a black key in between them. So you've got to take this into account when you're counting up half steps. Let's count up from our root A. A to A sharp is 1 half step, to B is 2, to C is 3. So C is 3 half steps away from A, making it a minor third, which means the notes A, C, and E make an A minor chord. So since a major third is 4 half steps away from the root, we need to raise that C up by a half step if we want to make this a major chord. So we'd have to turn that C into a C sharp. So the notes A, C sharp, and E make up an A major chord. Now, where this all comes into play with my method for identifying chords by ear is that any one of those 3 notes could be the bass note. So you could hear the note C as your bass, and that still very well could be an A minor chord. So when your third is in the bass, we call that a chord in first inversion. If the 5th is in the bass, that's called second inversion. So the reality is, once you identify your bass note, there are 6 possible major and minor chord options that we could be dealing with. It could be a major and minor chord, assuming that the bass note is the root, a major and minor chord, assuming that the bass note is the third, or we're in first inversion, and a major and minor chord, assuming that the bass note is the 5th, we're in second inversion. Now, this might seem like a lot, but it is so freeing once you get it, because once you figure out that bass note, you know exactly what 6 chords you need to test out to see which fits, rather than feeling completely lost, thinking this could be one of a seemingly endless possibility of chords. So to figure out your 6 chord options, you can build each chord individually using the chord building theory that we just covered, with both a major and minor chord option for each inversion, the bass note being the root, the bass note being the third, and the bass note being the 5th. But I'm gonna show you a cool little shortcut. We only need to build the 2 chord options, major and minor, based on the 5th being in the bass, and that'll actually tell us those 4 other options. I'll explain how in a minute. So let's take that A note again as the bass, but we're assuming that it's the 5th of a chord. So to figure out what chord that would be, we need to reverse engineer that chord building process. So A is up here at the pinky as my 5th. I'm gonna count down the scale, G, F. So some type of F is my 3rd, E, D is my root. Quick note of caution here, for major and minor chords, our 5th needs to actually be what we call a perfect 5th, which is 7 half steps up from the root. So since my 5th is A, to make sure that it's a perfect 5th, I need to count down to D to make sure that it is in fact 7 half steps up. Otherwise, I'm gonna have to adjust the D to either a D sharp or a D flat accordingly. Now you can confirm this by counting down, visualizing the piano keyboard like we did before, but that's really not necessary most of the time. Just remember, for any major and minor chord, the root and the 5th are gonna share the same natural sharp or flat status, except for any B chord. So if our 5th is A, the root is gonna be D. If our 5th was an A sharp, the root would be D sharp, and vice versa. So if A is our 5th, our chords are built off the notes D, F, and A. Now remember, the differentiating factor between major and minor chords is the 3rd, so we need to count up half steps from D to F to determine how we need to alter that F to make it either major or minor. So visualizing the keyboard, we've got D to D sharp is 1 half step, to E is 2, to F is 3. So D to F is 3 half steps, which is a minor third, which means it's a D minor chord. So to make it major, we need a major third, which is 4 half steps. So we're gonna add a half step to that F, making it an F sharp. So our major chord option is gonna be D, F sharp, and A, which is a D major chord. So again, with our bass note A, if that is the 5th, our 2 chord options are D major and D minor. Now here's the cool little shortcut that's gonna give us our 4 other options. We need to take a look at all the notes that we just found that build up those D major and D minor chords. Each one of these notes represents the root of one of our chord options. So like we just determined, if A is the 5th, that means the chord's either going to be a D major or a D minor. Now, if A is the third, the chord's either going to be an F major or an F sharp minor. Now for this, whichever root note is higher, so F sharp, that's higher of the two, that's gonna be the minor chord option, so F sharp minor. And then finally, obviously if A is the root, the chord's either gonna be an A major or an A minor. So to bring this all full circle, if you've identified the bass note of the chord you're trying to figure out as an A note, the 6 possible major and minor chord options that it could be are A major, A minor, F major, F sharp minor, D major, and D minor. So your next step is to use your ear and test each one of these chords one by one against the original chord to see which fits, like I showed you in part 1 of this series. But let's back up a second. If you're confused about how I came up with that shortcut, if you take the time and build out each individual chord option, you'll see how it works. So if A was our root and I build up that chord, that gives me the A major and the A minor chord. If A is our third and I build out those major and minor options, that's gonna give me F as my root and F sharp as my root for the minor option. So we've got an F major and an F minor chord. And so you can see when I look at the second inversion where D is my root, all those notes there, you can see how they mirror the roots of the other chord options. So that's how it works. You can rinse and repeat this whole process with any bass note. Now I know this was a lot to throw at you all at once, but remember, more often than not, it's not gonna come to this. In most pieces of music, especially in mainstream genres, once you identify that bass note, it's a safe bet that that's the root and the chord you're listening to is the major or minor chord that's just built off of that root. But now you have an action plan for when you run into situations where that isn't the case. I hope this was helpful and gives you confidence as you're trying to figure things out by ear, knowing that you now have a strategy and an action plan that you can use to help guide the process. Make sure you come back for part 3 of this series where we're gonna shift gears and talk about the method that I recommend to train your ear to easily pick out melodies. Subscribe and hit the notification bell on to make sure you don't miss that or any other future videos that I have coming out real soon for you guys. Thank you so much for watching. Don't forget, if you want to make your own classical or fingerstyle guitar arrangements, take my free training Fretboard Freedom at beyondtheguitar.com or linked down below. If you enjoyed the video, hit the like button to let me know and to help more people see it. But as always, much love, and I'll see you in the next one.